In this episode, I will present to you 16 common mistakes made by beginner programmers that I often encounter. Of course, there is nothing wrong with making mistakes. Every programmer has taken their first steps at some point, and many of us have made the same errors. It's important to learn from them for the future. If you are learning programming or are a beginner programmer, this material will definitely interest you. Hello, this is Kazimierz Spin. Welcome to the Code with Kazik channel, where I demonstrate how to effectively learn programming and become a successful programmer. Error 1. Using the wrong types. This error is quite important but very commonly encountered. Remember that if you are creating any models, their properties or fields should be of the appropriate types. Not every property should be of type string. This type should only store text. If you are using numbers, depending on whether you require an integer, floating point number, or currency, you should also use the appropriate type. For integers, this could be depending on the size, e.g., byte, short, int, or long. For floating point numbers, float or double. For currency, decimal. For dates, datetime. And for Boolean values, bool. Similarly, if you are using components in the user interface, you will also find the appropriate one for each, depending on the framework you are programming in. For example, in WPF, you can use a text box for strings, a numeric up-down for numbers, a checkbox for booleans, and a datetime picker for dates. Error 2. Poor formatting. This is always a problem at the beginning. Of course, there is nothing strange about it. Formatting may not be intuitive at first, but over time, as you program more, practice more, and review other programmers' code, it will definitely become easier for you to apply good formatting. Take a look at the code I've prepared. In C#, fortunately, thanks to the shortcut Ctrl plus K plus D, you can immediately fix the formatting in the lines. I press the shortcut Ctrl plus K plus D and notice that the formatting in the lines has already improved. Also, remember not to use too much space between lines, as it also reduces the readability of the code. More than one line of spacing is never necessary, so we can fix that right away, and our code can look like this. Notice that now this code is much more readable. Error 3. Poor naming of method and class variables. It is also important to always adhere to the same principles here. Of course, it is best to follow the accepted conventions. Take this example. Notice that here we have 3 fields, and in each of them the programmer uses different naming conventions. Sometimes they use camel case, sometimes camel case with underscores, and other times they separate words with just underscores. Above all, we should always stick to the same established rules within a single project. For fields, underscores plus camel case are usually used, so it should look like this. And most importantly, in every case, it should be done in the same way. When it comes to properties, we use Pascal case here, meaning the first letter is capitalized, and then each subsequent word starts with a capital letter, as if we are beginning with a capital letter. We do not use any underscores here. Always Pascal case. Similarly, we do not use capital letters here. So this is how the naming for properties can look. And everywhere for each property, we apply the same convention. Similarly, for methods in C#, we use the Pascal case convention for method names. So here we need to change set and name as well. Additionally, regarding the names themselves, they should be self-descriptive. Of course, we shouldn't overdo it with the length of variable, method, or class names, but remember to keep the names relatively short yet specific, clearly indicating what information they hold. As you can see in our example, the variable name A tells us nothing. Therefore, depending on the situation, we should name it appropriately. Let's assume that in this case it will be named employee, although, as I said, it doesn't have to be the same name as the class. In this case, it is because we don't know the full context. In any case, names like A or A followed by a number are the worst. It's unclear what they mean, so always strive to describe well what a given variable holds. Error 4. Excessive comments. While in projects where you are learning, you can freely add comments as they will help you understand the code better. If you want to go back to it, in production code, you shouldn't use too many comments. Look at our code. Such comments make the code less readable instead of more so. I advocate for minimal comments in such code. I believe that code should be self-describing. If you use appropriate naming for classes, methods, or variables, it will indeed be clear, and you won't need to add extra comments. I only include comments in the code when something might not be understood for various reasons by other programmers or by me in the future. These are non-obvious solutions that had to be implemented in a given case. Therefore, this code will be much more readable without those comments. Error 5. Large methods and classes. Beginner programmers tend to create fewer classes but make them more extensive. The same goes for methods. Unfortunately, this is quite a significant mistake, making your application hard to read. If you later need to find a specific piece of code, it will take you a lot of time. You must remember that programmers read code more often than they write it. Therefore, it's essential to ensure the readability of that code. If you create what is known as a 1,000-liner, meaning a class with several thousand lines, finding a specific piece of code later becomes very time-consuming. The same applies to methods. Methods should have at most a few, ideally no more than a dozen lines. Instead of creating huge classes and methods, create more smaller, appropriately named classes and methods. Error 6. Code duplication. This means creating the same code in several different places in our application. Remember that if you have the same code in multiple locations, when you need to make a modification or fix the code, you will have to implement those changes everywhere. It is much better to extract the common code, for example, into a separate class and use it in several places. Depending on the situation, you can also take advantage of inheritance. Error 7. Not writing reusable code. Remember that programming often consists of similar functionalities. If you need to write a class for data encryption, you can create it in a separate DLL, class library, and use it in different projects. This way, you can save a lot of time in the future. Error 8. Spaghetti code. Spaghetti code refers to code that is difficult to understand and looks like spaghetti. There are references to different classes in various places. For instance, sometimes database operations are in the model, sometimes in the repository, and in other cases in the controller, or even in the view. There is a lack of separation into layers, making it hard to find anything in such code. Changing code in one place causes additional errors elsewhere. To avoid such code, you need to apply the appropriate architecture in your application and, importantly, adhere to good patterns. Error 9. Poor exception handling. In error-prone areas, you must handle them appropriately. It's best to use the try-catch construct for this. Take a look at our example. As you can see, we have our logic call in the try-catch block. This way, our application will continue to function correctly, even in the event of an unexpected exception or error. Importantly, you cannot leave an empty catch block and suppress errors. Instead, it's advisable to log information about any potential errors, for example, to a file, making it easier for you to diagnose what actually went wrong later. Additionally, you can also implement catching all unhandled exceptions throughout the application and handle them appropriately. In each framework, such an implementation looks a bit different, but it usually only requires writing a few lines of code. Error 10. Trying to implement everything from scratch. I made this mistake myself at the beginning when I was learning programming. When you are already developing business applications, it is not worth implementing everything from scratch if there are already other free solutions and libraries that you can use. If you need to save data to a file, it is not worth writing your own library to do that. It is better to use existing solutions like nlog, serilog, or log4net. Each of these solutions will be better than writing your own library from scratch. Such writing from scratch can only be useful in one case, when you are working on a project to develop your programming skills. However, for the applications you are already writing for your clients, do not waste your time on that. There is no need to reinvent the wheel when libraries are tested and available. We can confidently use them. Error 11. Lack of unit tests. I wonder if I should also address this point here, as the lack of unit test writing is not only a mistake made by beginner programmers, but also sometimes by more experienced developers. It's important to understand from the very beginning what unit tests are and why we write them. They help us produce higher quality code with fewer potential errors, which is always very important for our clients. Additionally, they make code refactoring easier. Our code must also be of better quality. We need to focus on good practices, which makes maintaining the code easier, and we also have immediate documentation for the code we create. Error 12. Lack of validation for user input. You can never trust the user, and you should protect yourself in various ways wherever you collect data from them. Always verify first whether what the user provided is appropriate before performing any operations. Error 13. Not focusing on the end user. When writing an application, it's important to put yourself in the shoes of the end user who will be using your app. Try to make it as easy as possible for them to use the application. Depending on the type of app you are writing, users may spend several hours a day using it, so it's worth ensuring that this time is well spent. It's beneficial to learn how users interact with the app, listen to their feedback, and continuously improve it. Therefore, also focus on the user interface and what is known as UX, or user experience. Error 14. Assuming that if something works, it is good. If you copy some code and want to use it in your application, always try to analyze it thoroughly, line by line. It often happens that solutions proposed by others, although they may be upvoted, can work but may also contain bugs. So while you can certainly take inspiration from other solutions, always analyze that code to protect yourself from potential errors in your application. Just because some code works doesn't always mean it's good, bug-free, and the most optimal solution. Error 15. Lack of knowledge of the basics. Try to get to know the fundamentals very well. It is important to understand what static and abstract classes are, what reference and value types are, what inheritance, polymorphism, abstraction, encapsulation, composition, constructors, delegates, events, constants, and many other basic concepts entail. These fundamentals will accompany you throughout your programming career, so it's worth knowing them well to avoid making basic mistakes. Error 16. Lack of knowledge of clean code principles. Also try to focus on the principles of clean code. This will ensure that your code is of good quality. It will be easier for you to develop the application in the future. It is important to know what solid is and to adhere to its basic tenets. Of course, this is not knowledge you need to acquire right at the beginning, but after a few months of learning, it's worth starting to think about it. It's good to be familiar with popular design patterns and always stick to good principles. This is what I believe to be the list of the 16 most common mistakes made by beginner programmers. Among other things, I try to draw attention to all these mistakes for the participants of my training, Become a .NET Programmer, where I show the entire programming journey from the basics to working as a C# programmer. If you are interested in learning programming under my guidance, I also invite you to join. The registration link is visible below this material. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this film, be sure to join my community, where you'll also have access to exclusive additional materials and, most importantly, fantastic special bonuses. The registration link is located in the description box below the video. See you in the next episode.